Okay, we're going to wait a few minutes, couple of minutes here until as people are gradually coming in and joining us in the webinar. We are seeing you here from the west side of Santa Cruz. And as you can see, Ruth and I are in the same room here. We have a small audience here. My wife, Rusty, and Ruth's husband, John, are both here sitting behind us. It's going to be a new format for presenting this Emeriti lecture.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll give it another minute or so before we get formally started here. Okay, I can see that people are still checking in and joining us here. So I mentioned before that we're going to wait another couple of minutes before we get started.
How can you tell?
I have a little counter.
Oh. Oh, 42. I see.
That's devices. Of course, some of them are multiple people.
44.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let me just say again, we're coming to you from our library here in the west side of Santa Cruz. Ruth and I are in the same place. We're here with our spouses and going to present this Emeriti lecture in a little bit different format. But I think we will get started. Okay. So let me introduce myself. I'm Barry Bowman. I'm the president of the UCSC Emeriti Association. And for many years, the association has been sponsoring 2 lectures, one in the fall and one in the spring. And the purpose of these lectures is partly educational, partly entertainment for the Santa Cruz community, both the campus community and the wider community. And another purpose is it really allows us, the Emeriti Association, to really showcase the work that the Emeriti have been doing, the work that they continue to do after their formal retirement from the university. And tonight we have an excellent example of someone who has continued to be very active well into her Emeriti years. So with that, I'm going to introduce a long-term colleague of Ruth's. This is David Cope. David was professor emeritus in the Department of Music. At one point, he was provost of college, had a very distinguished career himself in composition, used computers for composition of music. And so let me turn this over to David. David, why don't you come on now?
Well, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my longtime friend, Ruth Solomon, highly respected performer, teacher, choreographer, dancer, writer, Broadway thespian, television artist, soloist with Jean Erdmann Dance Theater, creating more than 60 works in her unique version of the modern dance idiom, staging musical, dramatic productions such as Euripides, Hecuba, Stravinsky's L'Histoire du Soldat, and Brecht's Threepenny Opera. She was assistant director of the dance program at the New York University Tisch School of Arts, and then directed the dance program she established in theater arts at the University of California at Santa Cruz. Her teaching techniques have been documented in a hour-long video called Anatomy as a Master Image in Training Dancers. After appearing in an invited speaker at the Olympic Scientific Congress in Seoul, South Korea, she subsequently taught in Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, and Japan. Her articles on dance performance, administration, and pedagogy have appeared in Dance Magazine, Dance Teacher Now, Kinesiology and Medicine for Dance, and various other major periodicals. Her research in dance medicine, her research for dance medicine has produced publications in such medical journals as the Physician and Sports Medicine and the Journey of Bone and Joint Surgery. Her most extensive books are Prevention of Injuries in the Young Dancer, Preventing Dance Injuries, Soviet American Dance Medicine. I don't know what the Soviet American does. Anyway, The Two Faces of Dance Scholarship and East Meets West in Dance Voices in the Cross-Cultural Dialogue. The 7th edition of her Dance Medicine and Science biography covers the literature in the field for the last 60 years. She has also edited the proceedings and abstracts for the annual conferences of the International Association for Medicine and Science. Some of her latest publications include Chronic Lower Leg Compartment Syndrome in Young Athletes, Neurologic Back Injuries in Dancers, A Capture in Sports Neurology, Psychological Issues in Dance Medicine, and publications in Dance Medicine and Science, a bibliographer's perspective. She was the National Dance Association Scholar of the Year in 1992, Dance Professional of the Year in 1998, and Heritage Honoree in 2003. She served on the board of directors of the International Association for Dance Medicine and Science from its inception in 1990 to 2010, and in 2007 was elected co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Dance Medicine and Science, and continues to serve that capacity. She has done annual 3-month residencies under the direction of Dr. Lyle Mchaley at the Division of Sports Medicine, Harvard Medical Center for the last 39 years and became a credited medical assistant in 2003. During these residencies, she has conducted several major dance medicine studies, utilizing as participants the dancers of the Boston Ballet. In 2010, she was named Honorary Fellow of the Division of Sports Medicine, Children's Hospital of Boston, Harvard Medical Center. In 2017, she was elected as a Fellow of the International Association for Dance Medicine and Science and given a Lifetime Achievement Award. I could continue with many other awards,
God.
distinctions, recognitions of excellence, medals, decorations, and so on. But now, please join me in welcoming the most amazing and prestigious Ruth Solomon.
Oh, God.
Okay, and Ruth, it is up to you.
Too much to live up to. Thank you, David.
My pleasure.
I do want to say that David and I shared numerous performances, and he accompanied me in New York with a piece he composed the music for, that is one of my cherished moments in my experience. And I thank David for sharing that with me. And we performed and got through it.
No, you did a fantastic job.
Okay. This lecture will be divided into 2 parts. The first part will focus on the influences on my career as a dancer, choreographer, and teacher of technique. The second part on my research and as a medical professional in the field of dance medicine and sports medicine. I want to also acknowledge that I am a slug, and you will see the slug in the corner of the screen. And I am proud to be a slug. I'm also proud to be an Emeriti, because it's a wonderful organization that encourages its members to continue their work, and they're very gracious and generous in affording us opportunities such as this. And I'm proud to be chosen to give this lecture for the Emeriti. I'll start in 1962, when I was invited to Japan as a result of my teaching at the University of Hawaii. So for the next 10 years, I taught throughout Asia. And as David has said, in Taiwan and Beijing, China, and Guangzhou, China, Hong Kong, Seoul, Korea, Singapore, and those were really enlightening experiences. And because of that, we produced, John and I produced this book, East Meets West in Dance, which represents the major figures in the Asian dance communities in those countries, because they were making their own work, but were really enamored and desired American modern dance. They needed to know about American modern dance. And because of that, many of contemporary artists went over to teach in the different styles. And I was fortunate to be chosen to teach and to get to know these amazing artists, who then, after they assimilated the American styles of dance, began to choreograph in their own voices. I then came to Santa Cruz, and you can see I cut my hair in 1970. And I was 35 at the time, so you can do the math if you want to know how old I am. After years in ballet, I was trained in modern dance by Jean Erdman, who was married to Joseph Campbell, the renowned mythologist. So my influences were not only in theater and dance, but mythology as well. And we were very fortunate in that after rehearsal every night, mainly because Jean would not cook, she didn't know how to cook, we went out to dinner. And John and I would go out to dinner with Joseph Campbell and Jean Erdman, and he would expound on any topic that came up. And we would be exposed to these remarkable lectures over a salad or whatever. And he was so generous with his time and his information, and you never felt too stupid. You could ask him any question, and it reminds me, I don't know how many of you saw My Dinner with Andre, who was, it was a film based on Dinners with Andre Gregory, became a very well-known film. Well, I always called this special time our Dinners with Joe, and that was a very, very special time in my life. When I arrived at UCSC, amazingly, there was no dance studio or any place to teach classes. I was brought to teach dance and start a dance program, but I had no place to teach. So the first year I taught in the Stevenson Dining Hall, because that's where I found the first wooden floor on campus that I felt we could actually do a dance class on. And I taught while the staff cleaned up after lunch and dinner to the clatter of dishes. And it all went just fine, except it was an improvisation. So we had to build studios. That was the only way to go. And performing arts building was beginning to be built. I designed a special sprung floor for dance, and my experience at NYU School of the Arts allowed me the background to do this, as I designed a bunch of studios there. And this became of dire importance to me, in that we had to prevent injuries. And the way to do that was to have a good studio floor. So I demanded that the substructure be on 2x4 stringers set at 24-inch centers, which was unheard of by an architect. And they would not have any of it. So I fought and fought, and there was enough research to back up my insistence on this. And the architects who were tearing their hair out at me finally accepted this design. One morning, I have to tell you this little excerpt. One of my students, who at that time was sleeping in the woods because he couldn't afford room and board, and came into performing arts to take a shower or clean up for dance class. And he found that a cement truck was rolling up and was going to pour cement as the base for the dance studio wood floor. And he called me, and at 7 a.m. I tore up to the building and stood in the center of this very picture that you're looking at, which was not constructed at that time. And I said, if you pour that cement, it's going to be over my dead body. And thank God I held my ground, and they backed off. The trucks backed off, and we built a beautiful studio, which was resilient with energy return. And we actually built the drama studio next to it with the same flooring. And injury prevention was the prime mover for this fight. We then constructed a floor at the field house so that anyone who wanted to take a dance class had a quality studio. This allowed non-dance majors to experience the art form in relative safety. I have to tell you, we also had a secret studio. It wasn't so secret, but it was on the 3rd floor of applied sciences. If you can imagine, I was able to usurp that space. It was a lovely big space. And that studio lasted about 5 years, until the staff working next door got tired of hearing the drums and live music, which accompanied each class. So now their desks and chairs sit on a very nice sprung floor up at the top of Applied Sciences. I want to go on to just one story about the first piece of choreography I did at UCSC. And this piece was motivated by the beauty and uniqueness of the various locales on the campus. Each scene of this work was staged so that the audience could observe the dancers while moving across the campus. And they were led by these musicians who you can see at the top, and there were about 6 of them. And this scene is the opening scene with the dancers welcoming the audience from what now is the Quarry Plaza parking lot. It was just a parking lot at that time. This piece was called The Journey, and it took the journey all the way through the woods and in various locales across campus. It was based on the poetry of Archibald MacLeish, which I was motivated to use because John, my husband, had just finished his PhD on the poetry of Archibald MacLeish, and he is a professor of American contemporary literature. So each scene was staged in a different locale. And this was very much in vogue when I left New York. It was called environmental choreography or site-specific work. And I don't know if you know, but way in the woods, there was a limestone kiln. Also, I found all these mysterious places, and I put the dancers in the bricks of the limestone kiln, the empty spaces, and they vocalized the poetry of MacLeish. This is one of the next to last scenes in the lower quarry, and the audience viewed this scene from the top of a cliff before you entered the lower quarry in the back. I was very much involved with literary texts throughout my choreographic process. I'd like to just talk about this last scene, which takes place in the quarry on the main rock that remains, much of which weather has worn away since we did this scene. But here you see the dancers in the final scene. And this is the beginning of the MacLeish poem called Epistle to be Left in the Earth. And I'm remembering this piece mainly because it's so prescient now. And I think as you hear the words, you'll know why. It's colder now. There are many stars. We are drifting north by the Great Bear. The leaves are falling. The water is stone in the scooped rocks. To southward, red sun, gray air. The crows are slow on their crooked wings. The jays have left us. Long since we passed the flares of Orion. Each man believes in his heart he will die. Many have written last thoughts and last letters. None know if our deaths are now or forever. None know if this wandering earth will be found. And then we moved to the final scene where the last figure was this figure on the top of the rock in the quarry, way, way up behind the audience, who were all seated in what are now the audience spaces there. And he was called the Laughing Man. I entitled him the Laughing Man in my mind. And the last sounds you heard, that the audience heard, was his wild, ironic laughter directed at the plight of the figures below, which were embedded in the rock on the stage. And these are the last lines of the poem. They are voices. They are not words at all, but the wind rising. Also, none among us has seen God. We have thought often the flaws of sun in the late and driving weather, pointed to one tree, but it was not so. As for the nights, I warn you, the nights are dangerous. The wind changes at night and the dreams come. It is very cold. There are strange stars near Arcturus. Voices are crying an unknown name in the sky. I chose that poem to read tonight because it's so moving and, as I say, so prescient. As soon as I arrived at UCSC, I began working on developing a training program that grew out of all of my previous training, combining the work of many pioneer practitioners in the somatics and dance field. I knew at least I needed to teach more soundly and better, and try to prevent the many injuries that plagued us as dancers. In my mind, it was no longer okay to regurgitate what and how dance had been taught. We needed to rethink. I established a curriculum of classes 5 days a week, 2 hours each, at all levels, beginning, intermediate, and advanced. We alternated teachers each day so that students would have exposure to more than one approach. The faculty took each other's classes so that we knew what was being taught on alternate days. A pretty demanding program for both students and teachers. Here is a 3-minute snippet of the video, which is distributed both nationally and internationally. How do I make it go? Okay. Don't bother with the credits. Just try to look at the movement and see what we're doing. That's me in the black front. And here I'm working on a release of the hip sockets.
What you are going to see on this tape is a sequence of exercises I use to train dancers. These exercises constitute the first 45 minutes or warm-up phase of a 2-hour technique class. This is primarily floor work. That is work done while sitting or lying on the floor. Many teachers of contemporary dance today minimize the use of floor work. I continue to rely heavily on it because the support of the floor helps to reduce tension in the muscles we are trying to warm up. Floor work helps to decompress or unload the bones and joints we are trying to articulate. Further, work on the floor reduces most students' concern with balance, freeing them to experience other sensations. Floor work is not, of course, an end in itself. Everything that we do in this segment of the class must relate to standing movement. As we go through the specific exercises, I will try to point that out. These exercises have been gathered from various sources, including my own movement explorations over the years and my training in other dance techniques and body therapies. Often, what I have done is change the emphasis of familiar exercises in order to stress particular movement principles which are part of this training. What we do in the remainder of the class, standing work and moving in space, can develop in innumerable ways, but it should always build on the foundation established by the floor work. The primary intention of my work is to help students find the safest and most efficient way possible to use their bodies.
Okay, how do I go to the next one?
It should go.
Oh, okay. All right. You can still hear my New York accent in that one. I don't think I've gotten rid of it yet after all these years. In the summer of 1972, I established the Summer Dance Theater Institute. As faculty, I brought in some of the foremost contemporary dancers and choreographers, principally from the East Coast, because that was where I'm from and those were the people I knew. Students came from all over the US and some internationally. It was important to introduce numerous technique styles in the training process. Here are representatives in this slide of some of those styles. Modern dance is this huge umbrella that encompasses many styles of dance, and it tends to get lumped into one title, but that's just not so. This is Kelly Holt, who was an exponent of Eric Hawkins' technique. Here is Betty Wahlberg, who is one of the most amazing teachers of choreography. She worked with Jerry Robbins and was in a number of his pieces on Broadway. This is Albert Reed, who was a Merce Cunningham trained dancer and performer. This is me and whatever I did. And this is Bill Crotty, who was a Limon dancer. Here we are doing what I call the Horton Hinge. I don't call it, it's called the Horton Hinge. And this comes from the technique of Lester Horton. And as you can see, we lower ourselves to the ground in this position, which takes a lot of pelvic strength as you go all the way down. And this is the technique that the Lyle Mchaley company is trained in. And you know how amazing their dancers are. At about the same time I moved here, Tandy Beal also relocated to Santa Cruz and taught improvisation in our program and of course at Cabrillo. Her work was based on the inspiration she gained from Alwyn Nicolai, who was also a phenomenal, unique choreographer in his own right. This is Gus Solomons, who came as part of the faculty for the first Summer Dance Theater Institute and returned many times to teach in our full year's curriculum. He is also the director of the video that you just saw the little snippet of. I put this slide up so that you can see his back with huge hyperlordotic spine. He actually had for much of his dance career what is called a spondylolisthesis, which has one of the vertebrae slipping forward out of line. And he became very enamored of my technique. And if you can imagine anybody as tall, thin as he is doing a technique that was built on my body, a 5'2" short dancer, it meant that it could actually be translated to other types and styles of dance, which was very reassuring to me. This piece was called The Witch Dance 2, after Mary Wigman's piece, which she composed in 1914. There was a 1-minute film clip that remained of this piece. And based on that 1 minute, I built a whole piece of choreography that I did this solo piece. I just want to remark on the mask that you see here. It was designed by Elaine Yokoyama, who is a fantastic mask maker and our costume designer. And if you can imagine that I could not see out of this mask because my eyes on my face were somewhere near the nose. And so I almost had no idea where I was in space on stage, and just hope for the best throughout the piece. But this mask was a very important component because it replicated the mask that Mary Wigman used in her piece. In 1980, I was invited to the first Dance Medicine and Science conference, which was held in Los Angeles. And I was invited to present. And along with me, somebody else was invited, and that was Dr. Lyle Mchaley. And here is his picture. He was one of the first dance medicine specialists. He recognized the vulnerability of dancers and the uniqueness of dance injuries. And so I was very taken with his lectures and his interest in dancers. Here he is as a rugby player in a scrum. I think this is a scrum. I had to learn all about rugby in the last 39 years, as well as other sports. But I think that was one of my major challenges, was to learn about rugby. Anyway, I spent the next 39 years of my sabbaticals or I took leave without pay every spring quarter, and I spent it in Boston at the Division of Sports Medicine at Harvard Medical School. I needed to learn more about medicine. I needed to learn what went on in the body and how one could prevent injuries, and then how one could treat them as well as diagnose them. So Dr. Mchaley was very, very generous in taking me on as, and he became a mentor to me, and has suffered through 39 years of my being there. We presented at numerous Olympic scientific congresses, and then because of my work there, I returned to school for 3 years at night to become a certified medical assistant so that I could work in the OR. And here you see I'm behind Dr. Mchaley, and I always had to stand on a stool because he's very big, and even sitting down in order for me to be available to get anything or do something, I had to be able to hear him, and that meant standing on the stool. Here, I'm holding the light because in that particular surgery, the light started to wander off the center of the field. So my job became holding the light still so the surgery could continue. This piece is one of my favorites, and it was inspired by a column in the Santa Cruz Sentinel, of all things, written by Wally Trabing, describing hip replacement surgery. It's one illustration of what this transition produced as I became more and more absorbed in the medical aspect of injuries, dance injuries. The sculpture that you see here was designed by Norvid Roos, and it was his abstraction of a pelvis. And I did the whole piece moving through this sculpture, which hung on wires from the top of the Performing Arts Theater, and it swung out over the audience. And I moved through it standing and balancing and manipulating the pelvis, my pelvis, and the pelvis on throughout this piece. The soundtrack was the description of the surgery, and 3 of our acting faculty did, I did an overlay, a 3-track overlay of their voices doing this very dramatic reading of this surgery. And now we will look into the hip, etc. And they were quite wonderful with it. And that was the sound score. From 1960 onward, articles began appearing on dance medicine and science, and I started doing research in the field. As I began this research, I began this bibliography, which is now in its 8th edition and on its way to the 9th edition. It contains 5,000 citations and references from the English language literature published over the last 60 years, including articles in journals, books, and chapters from books. And it has 3 separate sections: the bibliography, which contains the citations, the subject index, which has 737 cross-reference subject headings, and the author index, which is a comprehensive guide to 7,500 authors whose names appear in the bibliography. I continue to work on this every day, and as you can imagine, it is a true labor of love. I'm just put this slide up so that you could see a list of only a few journals in which dance medicine and research has appeared. It gives you an idea of how widespread and international the field has become. Scandinavian, South African, European, Brazil, it's Asian, all over the international map. And this is only a few. In 1990, the International Association of Dance Medicine and Science was established, and its flagship journal of dance medicine and science is the key journal of that organization. John and I have served as editors-in-chief for the last 14 years. You can see that the articles are very wide-ranging. This is just the cover from 2019, an article on vitamin D supplementation, nicotine use in dancers, labral tears in the acetabula. It's very broad ranging and covers the entire field of dance medicine and science. During this time, we also published this book, Preventing Dance Injuries. There were a couple of books already out describing injuries sustained by dancers, but we wanted to focus on the prevention aspect of the subject. Our whole premise is that most of dance injuries, which are overwhelmingly considered a result of overuse, can be prevented by modification of training. And that's a fairly broad statement, but we believe wholeheartedly in it. I'd like to move on to the research aspect, and I'll only talk about two papers recently published because they cover two different areas I'm very interested in, two anatomic areas. And this one, arthroscopic debridement of hip labral tears in dancers, diagnosis, treatment, and rehabilitative therapies. And this study looks for the first time at outcomes of arthroscopic hip surgeries in dancers. And by arthroscopic, we mean it is not open surgery, but you go in with an arthroscope and you do not have to open a wound to access the labrum. No one has actually witnessed the occurrence of a labral tear. Hence, our understanding of this etiology of this injury remains somewhat theoretical. You can see, often see in football or in basketball when an anterior cruciate ligament occurs. It's very visible. When the hyperextension of the knee occurs. With the labrum, it's another story. In medical circles, there is a belief that one etiology for labral tears involves an underlying structural abnormality in the hip. It is our belief that there are numerous contributing factors to labral tears. The structural abnormality is one of the prime factors, but we think may be secondary to what is widely understood to be the basic mechanism of most dance injuries in general. That labral tears, as I have mentioned, is another overuse injury and results from the interplay between the dancer's unique anatomy and the extreme demands of the art form. And this belief is supported by the findings of the current study. Each dancer's anatomy is unique, and each dancer must find the place that his or her femur sits in the acetabulum. And I'll try to just demonstrate if I can get it. But there is a place that each femur sits in that hip socket in each dancer. And it's quite different, so that when you're taking the leg into extension, you have to be in that place. Otherwise, you'll grind against the acetabulum. So it's a result of a combination of faulty technique and an individual's anatomy. Okay, I just want to familiarize you with the anatomy I'm talking about. This is the femur, your thigh bone, and it sits in the acetabulum. This is a cutaway shot of the bone. Here is the labrum, which is a fibrocartilaginous rim attached to the margin of the acetabula. This is your greater trochanter, and that's usually what people think of as the hip, but that's the bone that you feel on the outside of the hip here. But what I am referring to is what is happening on the very inside and the deep hip socket going in here, not out here. So the function of the labrum is to secure the head of the femur in the joint and cushion its interaction with the acetabulum. So when the dancer develops the leg front and side and to the rear, it's important that it be in exactly the right place, so they're not grinding on the tissue in the hip socket. Prevention. How do we prevent these injuries? Well, what can be done? By far the most efficacious, albeit the least likely to occur, would be to reduce the dancers and the dance world's obsession with 180 degrees of turnout, so that your feet and your legs and your hips are supposed to turn out 180 degrees. Well, in my experience, I've never seen a dancer who turns out 180 degrees. It just very unlikely. Maybe in Russia, where they train from infants, then everything is stretched out, they might. So what we want to do is strengthen the deep pelvic muscles. And I don't just mean crunches and sit-ups and stuff like that, but an intelligently designed stretching program that balances the musculature and the use of the hip and pelvis anatomy. The dancers in our study were simply among those relatively few whose hips could not stand up to the rigors of the daily routine of the demands of the art form, whose faulty technique exacerbated the effect of such demands on the anatomy. Here you see a dancer. This is not made up. This is a real picture of her trying to stretch out her hip sockets. This particular picture photograph was taken in Taiwan. This is the Cloud Gate Company, the most beautiful, beautiful dancers. You can imagine they can do anything and they are very strong. And I was invited to teach there and I thought to myself, oh God, I don't have anything I can teach these dancers. They know everything. But when I walked into the studio, the morning I was to teach at 9 a.m., there they were, stretching. They hadn't even woken up yet, as you can see. They're somehow sleeping on their ligaments. And here they are stretching. Their tissues are cold. Is this a sound stretching program? I don't think so. I spent my time trying to impress upon them to experience what they were stretching so that they weren't on their ligaments and destabilizing the hip joints, so that they could feel the difference between stretching a ligament and stretching a tendon. And as you see, this absurd picture is not so absurd. By God, they do it. And they will go to extremes to gain more external rotation. This is stretching out the capsule and ligaments surrounding the joint, making it dysplastic and unstable. And 40% of our injuries were labral tears, accounting for 20% of all injuries in dancers. If torn, the labrum can create a loose body or flap that impinges on the joint and obstructs the rotation as the dancer is trying to rotate the leg. This image is the arthroscope going into the joint and dealing with the labrum. The joint is, this particular surgery is done with the joint in traction. So the hip socket is distracted to make room for the instrumentation. We use an extensive course of physical therapy prior to surgery. Technique modification only when conservative approach failed did we proceed to surgery. Dancers are susceptible to labral tears. The problem is that if they go to surgery, rehabilitation is lengthy by dance world standards, and 100% recovery is not guaranteed. Results that are acceptable for the general population may be less so for dancers. And this is the first study of outcomes in dancers, and it demonstrates a high rate of success, but we need long-term follow-up. We do not have long-term follow-up. I want to show you this picture because the actual title of this piece of choreography by these dancers is called Trainwreck, and it's clearly an accident waiting to happen. Because I'm speaking to a number of general population as well as dancers, I wanted to mention that in older adults who present with hip pain, it is not automatically an osteoarthritic condition. Pain of osteoarthritis is usually anterior on the front of the hip, but labral tears also produce this type of pain. If the pain is posterior, then it can be lumbar radiculopathy and sacroiliac dysfunction. Lateral hip pain is often associated with the greater inflammation around the greater trochanter. And a good physical examination is needed before clinching a diagnosis and recommending treatment. I want to move quickly to foot and ankle injuries in dancers as the last part of this talk. As you see, there are many, many injuries sustained by dancers. You might recognize some of these. And what I will go on to talk about briefly is the ostrigonum. Dr. Mchaley and I just published this paper, Posterior Ankle Decompression with Ostrigonum or Stieda Process Resection in Dancers. Case series report and review of the literature. It was just published in August, July and August in the Journal of Foot and Ankle Surgery. And the surgical technique is described in detail. I want to point out what an ostrigonum is. It's the little bone in the back of the ankle, and the dancer experiences pain on forced plantar flexion, where they're trying to get up on demi-point or in a point shoe. And it is present in 7 to 10% of the general population, but it may not matter in the general population because they don't go up on point. Here is a nice CT of the Stieda process, which is a bone developing on the back of the talus. Here's your tibia, and here is the talus, and here is your heel bone, your calcaneus. And the Stieda process forms there. And if you can imagine trying to go up on releve or demi-point with that blockage, here is a dancer trying to go up on demi-point, and you see the ostrigonum, which has broken off and is lodged between the tibia and the calcaneus and talus there. This is an X-ray of a dancer on point. So you can see the dancer in the point shoe, and this is the line that is optimal, going straight through the tibia and talus, lined up with the cuboids and metatarsals and straight down. Here you can see that this is not lined up and not optimal. And neither of these is functional. This is behind the line that you're supposed to be on, and this is in front. So that because a dancer tries to force the plantar flexion, they wind up with this kind of situation. And you can see what a dancer will do to gain more plantar flexion in their feet. Young dancer and the more mature dancer. This demonstrates, this happens to be my foot, and demonstrates the loss of ligamentous stability and in the joint because of trying to turn in bare feet. You leave the toes behind and the foot goes, and you finally wear out the ligaments.
Dancing is the thing.
I just want you to look at Rudolf Nureyeva's foot for a second.
I decided.
Here's a 45-year-old professional modern dancer's foot. And this is what happens. Actually, she isn't in any pain, but that's what her foot looks like. And here is the cover from the San Francisco Ballet program. And I just want you to look at this alignment and the knee going in one direction, the foot going in the other. This leg is hyperextended. This foot is completely pronated and the knee is going in another direction. And this was put on as a cover for the San Francisco Ballet. And most people would think that's very beautiful because they're looking at the tutus. And here I am working on the doctor's technique in the OR. As you see, I have major problems. And here they are practicing, and they are really into it. They're quite wonderful people. And my whole focus of my work is to keep dancers dancing longer. I want to thank you. This is from John also, who is my chief editor and keeps me together and makes me look good over and over again. I would not have done any of this without him. I give you my email address at the bottom, should you have any questions or want to contact me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ruth. That was really splendid. And as I said in my initial announcement of this, just a wonderful combination of art and science. So give people a chance to ask some questions if they want. I can see the questions here on my right-hand side, but we'll see if anybody else is asking questions. So I have one for you.
Yeah.
So you're really proposing that dancers kind of not to do such extreme things in their dance. So is the dancing world receptive to this? Are the teachers taking this seriously? These injuries look pretty bad.
Yeah, I would say we're making progress. Certain teachers still lock on to what they were taught and teach that way. But because there's so much literature out there now, I think we're making progress. We are demonstrating that you are doing damage if you do certain things. And it's not to inhibit the dancer in any way. It's to try to train them to work with as much facility as their body will allow within their range of motion.
Okay, let's see. Guess we're don't have any questions in the chat room there. Maybe we will wrap this up then. I think it's been a marvelous presentation, And you all have Ruth's email there. In the chat, we got a few comments from former students who might want to get in touch with Ruth at some point in the future. David, do you have any comments or questions for Ruth? You can unmute yourself there. Okay, all right, terrific. Okay, all right, well, with that, I thank everybody for coming. The next Emeriti lecture will be next spring in April. It's going to be the 25th anniversary of the School of Engineering, and we're going to have Foki and Kalidas from the engineering school presenting the Emeriti lecture in April. Hope to see you all there. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.